Firstly, Gillian, Richard, thank you both so much for joining us. So I thought it'd be good to kick things off really nice and simply, because there might be people in the room or in the audience who have heard the name Substack, but maybe don't have such a clear idea on what it is. So I'd love to know from you just how you describe what it is and then how you both came about using it in the first place.
You should take this because you've been on it longer.
Thank you. One of the very few things I got in on early, and I'm delighted that I did. But I think at the core of it, Substack is very simple. It is a newsletter platform. So it's just quite a simple piece of software that allows you to collate a bunch of email addresses, write a newsletter, a blog, and email it out to a bunch of people. So I think you can use it in that most basic format, and it's quite sort of simple. But over time, Substack has added various features to it that aid in the discoverability of what you're writing. So there's various mechanisms for recommending other writers and getting them recommending you back. There are the SEO is very good. So, you know, if you write about a subject and write about it well, then it will come up fairly high on Google, I've noticed. And then now Substack have sort of adding more social media-like features. So there is also an app which has a slightly Twitter-like interface, and writers now share their posts on there, and people can comment on them. And there are various different strands where you can, if you have a very engaged audience, which it's a very good for sort of hobbyists, blog-type subjects. So people often have a committed core of people that love what they do. So you can then interact with them, pose some questions, and offer a more personal service. And I guess the crucial aspect of it that makes it exciting for writers is not just that you can collate the emails, but there's a payment mechanism. So you can choose whether to make a post free to everyone. You can choose whether to add a paywall and at what point, and you can charge people, you know, what you like per month or annually to become a member, or maybe, you know, you can have tiers of membership too. So for writers, it offers quite an attractive way of actually getting paid for what you like doing most, which is writing.
Definitely. And I feel like this is something that will maybe apply to both of you, but was it something that you were aware of going into it and you were starting it with a real intention that Substack was where you wanted to be writing? Or was it more of like an experiment that you're like, actually, I'll just test this out, see how this works, and maybe try it more?
Yeah, I sort of launched in December 2023, which even for British journalists was quite on the early side. I think now it's getting very crowded. But I did it because I wanted to go freelance, and I'd always held positions at various publications. I wanted to give freelance a go. And so I felt like I needed a sort of hero platform for myself. I didn't even make myself a website. I sort of, you know, of my work or anything, I just sort of considered that my Substack is my website.
Yeah.
And it kind of worked because I hadn't been writing that much either, because when you're an editor-in-chief, you don't get a chance to write. So I wanted to get writing again. I thought that would be good. I didn't know it was going to become as big as it has. So it was, again, like kind of, I felt like I was early with it and very fortunate to do that, because I'm not always the earliest person to adopt the technologies. And so that's why I did it, because it just gave me more range. And, you know, with how the media works and the lot of layoffs and things like that, it's nice to have your own thing. And I consider it now part of my portfolio of offerings, basically.
Definitely. And Rich, was that the same with you? I know you said you entered it really early on. Was it a bit of like experimental, or was it with that more considered approach?
Well, it was funny because I actually just had a very specific idea. It was during lockdown that I launched. I write about a huge range of subjects, but the one that people like most is cocktails. And this was in lockdown, and people, including me, were making a lot more cocktails. And I kept getting messages from friends saying, oh, what Negroni should I buy? What vermouth should I buy for a Negroni? And is it okay if I use this gin in a gin and tonic and stuff? And I was just aware of Substack emerging. I think I'd subscribed to a couple of things on Substack. And I just had quite a clear idea of how cocktails would work in this format, one thing I was quite pleased about in retrospect is that I spent quite a bit of time thinking how it would work and surveying friends and sort of saying, how would you like to receive this? And so mine is actually quite clearly formatted, and it's quite clear in what it offers. So it comes out every Friday at 4:00, and I'm pretty religious about that. And that's the thing that people like about it. And every time there's a cocktail recipe. And then below that, there's a bunch of links and essays, and sometimes it's long, sometimes it's shorter. I'll often do a matched playlist with a cocktail. And then at the very bottom, I will sort of do a shopping list of what you need to get in for next time. So it kind of rolls over and which is very useful for me because it sort of organizes my thoughts for next time and allows it to keep going. So it's quite, so I did put some thought in it, and it's quite specific. And we can talk about this later, but there are advantages to doing something open-ended, and then there are advantages of really finding a niche. But what I found is that people quite like the fact that it turns up at Friday at 4:00, and it's like, oh, it's the weekend. And it's great for me because it sort of stops me from as a writer with an open platform, you could write about anything, and that choice can be quite overwhelming. But the fact that it's very specifically about a fun topic stops me from going on at inordinate length about, knotty political things that would be quite easy to do.
Definitely. Well, in honesty, you've led me on really nicely to my next question, which was going to be about that difference. So, Gillian, I know that your Substack is it's all about all of these different varying interests, everything from parenting to living in East London, whereas Richard, as you say, yours is a bit more of a deep focus into spirits and that sort of drinking culture. So are there things from each other's approaches that you admire or wish you'd like to adapt, or is it more that you know that you've got the way that you do it and you really like that and it works for your readers?
I mean, I'm quite jealous of Richard having a niche.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say that on Substack you need a niche because then people know what they're getting, right? So I definitely see a bit of churn, especially with paid subscribers. If I put out something one week on a topic that just doesn't interest readers, it will interest someone. But if someone signed up thinking they're getting something, maybe they signed up about an essay I'd written on body positivity or something, and then the next week it's about motherhood, and they're like, well, I'm not a mom, I don't care. So it can lead to issues of perhaps losing a few paid subscribers that way. Also, just in terms of picking what I want to do, sometimes it feels quite, it should be good, but sometimes it feels a bit overwhelming. And I think, but I just I don't have a niche. I like writing about all these different things. And I find I've got so many different interests, and I'm not really a specialist in one particular thing. That's been my whole career. I was a features writer. When I worked at Refinery 29, that covered everything. So I've just never really focused in on one thing. So I like writing about it all, and I will probably continue to do so. But at the same time, I'm always jealous of someone with a niche because it just seems to be easier to pick what you're going to do that week.
Yeah, completely fair. And Richard, would you say that's similar for you? Or?
Well, there is the grass is always greener aspect of it. So at times, cocktails can be quite restricting. And for example, I'd quite like a more open aspect of my platform, I guess, because I am in my other career, I am hugely wide-ranging. And sometimes I do have things to say on some subject or another. And it feels odd to have an audience of committed subscribers who you don't then... I actually did it this week. There was a piece that, for various reasons, didn't run, and I in the publication that was going to run it, just due to timing issues, and I put it out on my Substack, and I did, and I got quite a nice response to it. But I also noticed a few subscribers going down. It's like, we don't want you, sharing your opinions about this and that. We're here for the cocktails. So, but the reason, my particular approach to cocktails, I think, is the reason I like writing about them is they open up a huge world of things. So there are lots of people in that sort of food and drink space who get very geeky about things or are really interested in the collecting or, the politics of that world itself. And what I like about it is I can dip into a bit of that, or some weeks it can be going into more the culinary aspect of it. Sometimes you're just going into history and what I generally like about it is I'll kind of come up with a cocktail, I'll start writing about it, and then you just go down this really interesting rabbit hole and you're looking up the politics of revolutionary Cuba or something, because that's where the cocktail came from. And I think that's what people like about it, is it's a bit of an adventure. And I think that the lockdown origins of it also still play into it a bit, because that was a time when you couldn't go to bars, you couldn't travel. So it was sort of a way of, I always sort of saw the cocktail as a portal that just takes you to some other place or mental space. So
No, brilliant. Yeah, that's
and also, I don't think there was much spirits, right, or food and drink writing that was doing that. So when I write, I write about them for newspapers and magazines quite a lot, but it's often just got quite a narrow consumer focus, or they just want you to recommend 5 gins or something, and that's fine, and I can do that. But actually, there's a lot more you can do with it. So you have this freedom.
It sounds like for both of you, it definitely opens up that freedom, both on the niche side and on the sort of more expansive interest side. You definitely get that through the platform and being able to publish those articles that you want. Yeah, brilliant. So as you touched on, you've both spent years writing for major traditional media outlets as well. Like Gillian, obviously yourself, previously editor-in-chief of Refinery 29. Richard, I know you spent years writing everything for The Guardian and The Telegraph, amongst others. So I think it'd be interesting to know, with one foot in this more traditional media and then one in Substack, which I think we see as more of this newer creator-led space, does writing for Substack feel quite different to when you are writing for magazines or publications that are more traditional?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun because you're allowed to do whatever you want. But the main things I miss is obviously having an editor. And then the collaboration that comes talking through a piece. I don't have anyone to do that with. I work at home with my husband and he's not interested. So I miss the dialogue that goes into pieces. I can sort of call a friend if I really want to get through something, but I don't tend to do that. And so I miss that aspect, but it's fun to be able to do whatever you want. And you can do pieces which wouldn't be published anywhere, which, actually one of my biggest pieces, it was quite silly, really. It was called How to Have a Joan Didion Easter Party. And I went through all her books, because she loved having Easter parties. And I went through her interviews and her books and put it all together of what she would serve and what she wears and the music she'd play and everything. And people loved it, but no one would ever publish that. So, so it's, you can do fun things like that.
Awesome.
One thing I particularly appreciate is I can capitalize the names of cocktails, which if you write for any newspaper, they insist on putting them in lowercase, and it just looks a huge mess. So there are particular kind of things like that. But yeah, mine is very sort of whimsical, really, and it can go in many different directions. And there's also things like I don't do it every week, but I very often do a matched playlist, for example. And actually, that's the thing. That is hugely fun, and if one wanted, there are podcasts, you can host podcasts on there, you can do videos, and I have not much interest in doing videos, but, you can take it in all sorts of different directions. And there's various ones that I subscribe to that are in, I just enjoy the ones that are quite niche and in different areas. There's one I subscribe to, which is just about animation and the animation industry. And that's the thing I'm interested in, but know nothing about. And I just love having this thing that turns up and, it gives you a YouTube link to some weird Slovak animation. And, I think it's very good for allowing people to just do stuff that would never find its way into your normal media diet.
Definitely. I think that sense of freedom is something that's really coming across from both of you, which is obviously something that's attracted you both to the platform. But equally, as consumers of the media on the platform, is a great thing to see that there's such that breadth to be able to look at everything from animation to parenting to spirits to videos, short form, long form content, and everything in between. That's great. I think one thing that you've both touched upon that people talk about a lot with Substack is that sense of sort of direct audience engagement and the real sense of community that you can build up. Is it something that you feel closer to your readers on Substack than you would if you were writing in a traditional newspaper or for a traditional medium?
Absolutely. I have quite a close relationship with my readers. I know a lot of their first names. You have repeat commenters. Some people will pay and they just sort of stay silent. You don't really hear from them. And then some people are very in the comments and everything. And it's really nice. And also I get a lot, especially when you write something a bit more personal, you get a bit more of a response from people, because I do that sometimes. And I'll get messages, I'll get DMs on Instagram. Some people reply to the email and comment. So you're getting it all over, really, which is really, really nice. And I always reply to everyone because I think you should. And it's good to build engagement that way. And I will say that Substack's actually quite a nice platform. I think just by its nature, because it's writers and readers, it attracts a certain person. So it doesn't have the sort of nasty bots of Twitter or, the Instagram trolls or anything. It's quite a nice platform. I mean, people will disagree with you. But overall, I think it took me a while to get there because, I wouldn't read the comments on a piece I wrote for the Times because they should be really nasty. But with this, and I think at the beginning, I was prepped to get all the negative comments, and they just never came. And now I've relaxed and I don't expect to get them because it's just not that sort of platform.
Yeah. No, I'd agree. I've got lovely followers. And there is, for example, a guy who's made every single cocktail that I've made and has a spreadsheet and photos of it and stuff. But then there are also people that say, oh, I don't drink, but I just like it. So, because it's sort of just upbeat and happy. So it's, so that's lovely. I could probably engage with them more, actually. But it's also very good, just as a freelancer from a professional point of view. I know that, lots of editors and other journalists follow. And I think with the decline of, I'm no longer on X, I use Instagram less. And so without those kind of social media platforms that allow this kind of soft networking to happen, I find the Substack has almost taken over from that as a way of just loosely keeping in touch with people. So if I do go to there was a Substack party actually on Tuesday, but it's quite nice meeting people and they say, I made your cocktail, or I was reading this, and you realize, your work is out there in the world and being read, and you've got a shop window.
I've been recognized a few times for mine, and I've never been recognized before in my life. So there's definitely a different relationship there.
Definitely. It feels like it's almost moving the dial a little bit more towards that like creator-led as much as it is journalist-led sort of idea of, having that direct engagement, as you say, and that real sense of community. I know a lot of creators have.
But also, I think for a writer, I mean, there are people that do podcasts on it too, but I think what's very attractive is you're being recognized for your writing. You're not having to go and pretend to do the sort of, hey guys, on Instagram stuff that I think most writers probably find quite excruciating. I mean, some people are very good at it, but it's not a natural skill of mine. So it's very nice just to be recognized for the thing that you got into it for doing. And, the people, and I think it says something quite interesting about the creator economy, that it more than any platform, it sort of cuts out the middleman. So it allows you to so people are directly paying for what you provide. And there's something very rewarding about that relationship.
Definitely. And so do you think that's something that's different that readers are looking for from journalists, from Substackers and from creators generally than they were maybe 5 or 10 years ago, that move towards, what as you say, like that sort of personal, but very like authoritative, I know this and this is my.
I mean, I sort of echo Richard here, is that there is a move towards that because of social media platforms and the internet generally. I think a lot of people feel quite awkward about doing it. I sometimes take photos. I write about fashion and style as well. And sometimes I take photos of my outfits. And I can tell you the first time I did that, it was just horrible. I mean, I found it so uncomfortable, but I was like trying to challenge myself, and I'm, thinking this is what people are doing now. I need to sort of loosen up a bit. to stay relevant, especially on somewhere like Substack, and in the fashion and beauty category in particular, there's a lot of people taking photos of themselves. And that's what people want. They want to see what the writers look like in that space. So that's something I've tried to get into a bit more. But on somewhere like Substack, I think, yes, it is personality driven. But I also think that, I guess the media is going that way too a bit. And when a young person tells me they want to be a journalist, and you sort of go, oh, okay. Yeah. But one thing I would tell them is like, you should get good at being on camera as well as doing the writing. Because if you're going to start up and you're young and come up, I think it's a good skill to have. You can resist, but I think you're smart, especially if you're younger, to do that.
Yeah, it feels like it's becoming more part of a journalist's toolkit as they are going, more junior journalists are trying that to be on camera. And it's something that we see media publications definitely sort of investing more in as well over the past few years. So as a PR, I obviously wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't ask about brands. So I'd love to dig into a little bit about the branded work either of you have done, if you've done any, and what makes those collaborations work well. And equally, what can make those collaborations not work well, or anything that you've seen that you think is a bit of a mistake from a brand.
So, the last thing I said was about the direct relationship, I guess, that you have with your readers. So it's very much a relationship of trust. So I guess for brands to enter the space, it would be, it can work, but I think it needs to sort of respect that core sort of link. So I know Substack are introducing now branded partnerships, and so there are ways of, for example, if you have all your posts paid, a brand could sort of sponsor and say this one is unlocked. Then there's various sort of tools to play. I haven't explored it fully, but so yeah, I mean, what I like is that it's direct. So readers sort of know that I'm not going to. I'm always quite sort of, for example, brand agnostic about what rum to use or bourbon or something, because I'm sort of aware that my readers, I want it to be as accessible as possible so that people don't feel that they're inhibited from making something because they haven't got a £100 bourbon at home. But then again, there are also ones that I prefer to others, and I'm constantly there are certain bottles and brands that I recommend just quite naturally. So it wouldn't really be so unusual to have a brand entering that space. But I think that it's just got to feel authentic, I think. And likewise, were a brand to start a Substack themselves, there are brands that people are intrigued by and have a mystique and, perhaps insights to offer that, would also be valuable.
Yeah, so I have worked with quite a few brands on Substack and sponsored content and stuff like that, all of which I've just negotiated myself. I've been approached. I've never gone to a brand and sort of pitched myself. But they were all stuff that felt quite natural. There was a film company. Do I say names? I don't know. There was a movie, the film company. I was writing about their films anyway because I cover so much. Everyone's like body positivity, shopping, Joan Didion. Yeah, so I wrote a lot about their films anyway. And then they approached me and said, "We'd love to do a collaboration with you." And I was like, "Well, great, because this is not going to sound weird because I've written about you before." And likewise, there was a beauty product that I mentioned that I liked. And then a couple of months later, they got in touch and asked me if they could sponsor a newsletter. And I think when they work, I think the best way to work, well, first of all, if someone's already writing about it, that's great because it's always going to feel a bit more natural because they obviously like the brand or use the brand. But I think in terms of working together, I have turned down some things as well because it felt like it was just the collaboration was not going to work. And when I I think that brands should be mindful of that the writer really knows their readership and they know what's going to be a turn off for their readers. And I had a huge personal grooming company approach me about doing something, and they were just being so prescriptive. It was just going to read like an ad, and they wanted me to name the product within the first 50 words. And it just wasn't going to work. And when I've worked with beauty brands before, it's been incorporated into a bigger story. It's not just reviewing a product, because no one wants to get a product review emailed in. So it's about my life and how this fits into my life. And then that feels very natural. So I think my advice to brands would be to trust the writer to know what works best for their audience, really listen to them. And the company I didn't end up working with, it ended very amicably. And they took my notes, actually, and they said, we're actually going to sort of rethink our strategy, because they were thinking too much like an ad company, I think. And like Substack creators and writers don't want to just be a mouthpiece for brands, I think. So I think it's worth listening to them and to understand that it's not an advertorial and it has to be a bit different. And so that's why that conversation didn't go further. But they did take my notes, actually, and they said, thank you, we're probably going to rethink our strategy.
No, that's really interesting. It sounds from both of you as though that authenticity is key, and for brands, knowing the writers who they are, pitching to or looking to work with has an interest in them already, or something along those lines is good.
It's funny, actually, because I quite often, as I'm sort of going through and decorating mine, I will often pick out like old adverts of lovely 1950s Italian vermouth adverts or something like that. And then so I sort of think, hang on, I'm actually putting adverts into my copy anyway, and nobody's paying me to. Yeah, often the company's defunct, but there's absolutely no reason why that's not a.
The other thing I would just add, which I think is a turnoff and is good for brands to know, is if you are going to do activations on Substack, don't drop them all at the same time. Because I remember there was a week, and there was an American bedding company. And it seemed like they were sponsoring every single person in America's Substack all in the space of 5 days. And that feels, I think, is a bit of a turnoff for people. So I'd say if you are going to work with writers, maybe pace out a little bit, or not just sort of go, okay, this is a week with, getting Substack, and then all of a sudden everything's sponsored by the same person. I think that's wise advice.
Definitely. It seems like it would be a little bit jarring if you go on a platform and suddenly every post is sponsored by the same company. So I suppose we've touched on it a little bit, talking about brands who set up their own Substacks. I know that Nike's done this, plenty of others have as well. Is this something that you sort of recommend to brands, or do you think it's better to partner with the writers who are already on there, or even just to pay attention to the conversations that are happening and use that to inform a bit more of their sort of media strategy?
I would say it would entirely depend on the brand. For example, if it's a founder of a company that have seen it from the beginning and have a interesting story to tell, then I can totally see, that working. If it's a very established company, there's obviously going to be a lot less freedom about what they can say that's commercially sensitive or not. So, I think they'd have to be careful about how to position that in a way that it was offering something worthwhile. But, when you talk to the people at these companies, they always have interesting things to say and insights. I guess, just in that world of alcohol, the distillers and people they're fascinating, and the people, and actually it's very often the bigger companies that are more, I love visiting the huge distilleries, and they're often more interesting than the little boutique ones.
Yeah.
So, can you find a way of telling those stories that is interesting and is also sustainable? Because perhaps I think any columnist would say it's quite easy to write one column, but it's really difficult to write a column every week in perpetuity. And many people, you see a lot of people start Substacks, and then you kind of go back, oh yeah. And then a year later they've written 3 and you realize it's sort of putted out. So I think you've just got to have a clear strategy about what you're offering, why. Maybe there's a time limit on it. Maybe there's, but I think you're asking people to give you their email address and their attention and space in their inbox. So I think you need to be quite clear as to what you're offering.
Yeah, I think some brands have done it quite well. I think Tory Burch is one that's done it quite well. But I've seen a lot of bad ones as well. And I will say this, is that brand Substacks get interrogated much more than a personal Substack. So everyone's kind of cheering each other on when it's writers. And then if a brand launches, expect for people to really put you and, to interrogate you further.
Yeah.
And then my other thing I was going to say about brands is I think if you are going to do it and have your own Substack, you've got to put resources into it and it's not some, the social media intern and they can do it. It's like, I think it needs to be done well because people will take you down.
And it's the sort of thing you can't have becoming a digital graveyard, right? That people can then...
Yeah. I do think the best way to do it, though, is to work with writers who have a platform and who have subscribers. Find out who's writing about your brand or find out in that space that something that aligns with your brand. I think that's probably the best way to get into it, especially to start. I mean, I think twice personally before doing a brand Substack.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you should really think hard about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you want to get into the space, it's best to work with writers who are in your area of interest, I think.
That's really interesting. Thank you. We have to touch on AI. It's something that is impossible not to touch on at the moment. It feels very zeitgeisty. So do you think platforms like Substack become more valuable in an AI-heavy world? Because obviously it does have that, more human perspective and a bit more personality. As you both said, there are things that you can publish there where you maybe wouldn't be able to publish it in a traditional media outlet. So do you think that becomes ever more valuable in the era of AI, or is it impacting the platform in a different way?
It's very interesting because there is the... Yes. So your Substack has to be authentic, and I can tell if it's written by AI within 5 words.
There's a lot of AI on Substack.
And there's a lot of AI, particularly on the app. It's quite funny. You will see people pleading with people to read their Substack, but it's clearly written by AI, and you think, why? Why are you even bothering? If you don't have something to say that you can express yourself, what is the point? I'm very anti-AI, I must say, but from a writing point of view, because to me the whole point of writing is it's the process of discovery itself. It's kind of thinking things through. Like I said, part of the pleasure of my Substack is when I start writing, I don't necessarily know where I'm going to end up, and I think that's what people quite like, being taken on that journey. It's sort of thinking something through, and it's offering a distinct point of view. And those are 2 things that AI just doesn't, by its very technological nature, do. It doesn't think, it doesn't experience the world, it doesn't have a body, it doesn't have a memory or, let alone a soul or anything sort of ineffable. And it's almost programmed to be bland. Like, it equivocates, it doesn't have a point of view, it's kind of constantly ingratiating. And I just think that all of that stuff is just so anathema to write it. But somebody actually shared quite a funny note on the Substack app the other day, which is pretty much everyone agrees that this is the death of creativity, and all creatives sort of hate it, really. But they've never seen so much creative writing in response to AI. Like, people really kind of I've written some brilliant essays taking down AI and trying to get to what it is that writing is and what they're trying to do. And actually, I think in a funny kind of way, to your point, it does actually sort of reinforce the value of something like Substack, where writers actually have the platform to write.
Yes, I mean, it's in the way that, there was a song recently that got very popular and it turned out it was AI. That happens on Substack too. I mean, there's essays with 5,000 likes and it's so clearly AI. So it has penetrated the platform. I mean, I've never used a try sentence in my life, and I never would. It wouldn't be my voice. But people are using it. And like Richard says, just why? Why bother? Why are you going onto this platform? But I'd say it's a lot. I think there was a stat about how much AI is on Substack, and it was a percentage. So it's there, whether you like it or not.
maybe there'll be some regulation coming in. I mean, we don't know what they have planned next, but that would be.
But the thing about Substack is there is this sort of they are kind of drawing you to the app a lot more and trying to make it more Twitter-like and centralized. But it's also, I would say a significant proportion of my followers probably don't really know what Substack is, because what's happened is a friend of theirs has forwarded them my email and there's a button on the bottom and they put it in and then it just arrives in their inbox. And so you can have a totally, do you know what I mean? You can have something on Substack that is just you and your readers that has very little to do with Substack itself. And I quite like that flexibility, that I think at the core of it, it is this very simple mechanism. It's just an email list, and should Substack ever go down, I think, from recent experience of social media platforms, we should probably expect that it will inshitify at some point because everyone does. You still have that kind of list of emails and you could probably take them to whatever the next Substack is. So Substack might not like me saying that, but I think but I think as a writer, that's another attractive thing about it is sort of, for me, it's low-finess.
Absolutely. And for the record, you've definitely unlocked a new word in my vocabulary there, which I'll absolutely be using. So I suppose that brings us on to something which I would be quite interested to know both your perspectives on, which is how do you see Substack and sort of more generally this direct-to-reader style of journalism continuing to evolve over the next few years? Do you think that, AI versus that is going to be a big sort of battleground that's going to happen? Or is it just that Substack's going to keep on going as it is and more people are going to be joining the platform? Yeah, I'd be really interested to know both your thoughts.
So I sort of think Substack is the future for now. And I can't imagine, in all honesty, in 20 years' time, if this sort of newsletter model is still being really effective. I can't say that I'm very faithful that would happen. I think that especially as it gets more saturated and gets more crowded, there's been a lot of articles in the mainstream press, mainstream media about, my inbox is at capacity. I can't take any more emails. People don't like it. And we're sort of even seeing that when newer writers who join the platform now, unless they have a really big pre-existing audience, are struggling to get those subscribers because I think people are sort of, as I say, at capacity. Not to say you can't join, but I've definitely seen that with some people, struggling to really get a good subscriber list, even though they're really talented. So is it going to just keep growing and growing and growing? I mean, Substack obviously is hoping it is, and they have investors and everything, but I sort of think that everything in media changes so fast, right? And you can't really predict what's going to happen. But I would be surprised if in 20, 30 years' time, this model is still really popular. I think it's potentially, I should really say this, but I think it's going to be potentially like something that we look back on and laugh about. And everyone's like, oh, do you remember when everyone was putting out personal newsletters and we were paying for them? I think that's a very likely option. But for now, it's the future. So, but, the future. Okay, that's what I'd say.
But to my point, like the dominant media platform like that has just shifted around over the last, the digital era. It wasn't long ago that newspapers' strategy was to put all their stuff on Facebook, for example, and that doesn't work anymore. And so there are, or maybe it works for a certain niche of content, but so it does move around where the digital zeitgeist is at any moment. And there is definitely, it is, like I said, I'm very happy that I got into Substack early because personally I find it's a medium that suits me and I really like. And coming into it now, it is clearly difficult to build audiences. And also I think probably it's slowing down a little bit the more crowded it becomes. I would personally quite like them to introduce slightly different features. So for example, this is something that creators often say, it would be good if you could sort of say, take out I'm not sure exactly how the distribution mechanism would work, but if you could pay a fee to Substack every month and say get 5 newsletters from it, rather than necessarily paying everyone individually, because there are some things that I want to read occasionally, but don't necessarily want to pay for myself all the time. So I certainly feel that there's different things they could do with how the money is distributed and pooled, and maybe, I did try. There's a person who we interact a lot, offering sort of 2 for the price of 1. Like, you subscribe to hers and you get mine for free and stuff. So there are maybe things you can do between creators to sort of offer a bit more value. But I'm always aware that it's quite a big ask to get someone to pay, £5 a month or £50 a year for one writer, when you can, there's other things to spend money on.
Well, thank you both so much. That was incredibly insightful. Before we open up to audience questions, just one final one from me, which is, if someone leaves this room today and remembers just one thing about Substack, why it matters now, etc., if you had one sort of key takeaway about the whole platform, what would that be, just in a sentence?
I think definitely get involved if you can. Maybe pause on putting out a brand Substack, I think. But you could happily work with people. And I think you should all refeed me if you don't already. Emily Sundberg's Feed Me. So I think that's the sort of the business Substack that all PR should read.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Perfect. Richard, what about yourself?
That's a great tip. I think for me, the core of Substack, I mean, this is to repeat my point, is that it's simple and direct. It's kind of unmediated. It allows the most sort of direct engagement between creator and receiver. And that's sort of it. That's its great strength. So there's many things that you can do with that. There's many kinds of relationship that can flourish from that. But what I personally like about it is it's sort of up to you what you do with that.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I'm sure there's lots in that for all of us in the room and hopefully listening to take away. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. Please can we give Richard and Gillian a hand?